This is Tax Pro Nation, the home of independent tax professionals. Find community, maximize your earnings, and live life on your own terms. I'm your host, Jeff Dolan, Vice President of Pronto Tax School.
And I'm your co-host, Andy Fry, founder and CEO of Pronto Tax School.
As a tax professional, you take pride in giving the best service you can to every client you serve. Too often, your good work goes unnoticed. Too often, your story goes untold. No more. Unnoticed and untold ends now. Welcome to Season 2, the Season of Story, where it's all about recognizing and appreciating you, the hardworking tax professionals that inhabit the mysterious land known as Tax Pro Nation.
Welcome to the first episode of Season 2 of Tax Pro Nation. In this first episode, we're going to hear from our winner of the Tax Professional of the Year in 2020, Carlos Samaniego. He also won the animated short film directed by yours truly, which is going to be out very soon, if not already, by the time this episode airs. Definitely go to taxpronation.com or prontotaxschool.com and click on podcast to see if the link is there to watch that short film. Carlos's story is very unique, and we cannot wait to hear from him. He started as a paramedic. He was a tax evader, and he turned his life around to become a self-taught tax professional. Now he's an author, speaker, mentor. We cannot wait to hear from him, so let's jump in. This is great to have you on, Carlos. We are excited to hear your story. We are going to go through your journey in the tax world and what the highs and lows were and all the key points. Does that sound like a good plan?
Sounds like a plan. I'm extremely excited just being on here and being able to share kind of my story and appreciate being selected here. So,
absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, we appreciate you, Carlos. And I think it's interesting for a lot of people that aren't maybe familiar with tax professionals in general. You know, they think a lot of times that we all come from a formal accounting background and we were just brought up in the traditional way of CPAs or accountants. In your case, though, I mean, you took... and this is more common than people would think, a little bit of a different pathway in that you started your career, professionally at least, in the medical field, right? How did you start out in your working career as a professional?
Yeah, it's actually, like you said, I had nothing to do with accounting, taxes, nothing like that. I literally started as getting out of high school. I joined the Army to become a combat medic. That was actually my original career choice coming out of high school. So I ended up joining the Army, spent a few years in the Army, and when I got out of the Army, I realized my dad was a Vietnam veteran, and he had a huge influence on my life. And, my grandfather served in World War II, so we kind of had a military background. So I always thought, that's what I'm going to end up doing is, joining the military. And my dad was a medic. I wanted to be a medic. Actually, even before wanting to be a medic, I wanted to go to West Point. That was kind of my dream in junior high and high school. So... well, I realized I didn't have the grades, good enough grades in high school to go to West Point. So I just decided to become a medic and became a medic. And when I was in the military, I decided it wasn't for me. It's not what I really wanted to do. Watching the movies and reading the books is nothing like the reality of it. And I got out, and when I got out of the military, I'm like, well, what am I going to do? And it kind of took me to become an EMS person here locally, and I worked as an EMT for over 11 years.
Wow. And
it was a great career. I loved it. And in fact, if certain things hadn't happened during that career, I'd probably still be doing that work today.
What did you love about it?
You know what? It's the ability to help people at their ultimate time of need.
Right.
Whether it be a car accident, a medical emergency, heart attack. I have to admit, initially it was the excitement of, that adventure, the adrenaline rush. And it is for a lot of people in that industry when they first start. But once you get over that, you start to realize it's that ability to be able to help people. We always have this saying, we never saved lives, we kind of salvaged lives. The doctors would do the saving. We would get to them at the scene of the accident, the emergency, keep them going until we can get them, until we have the medical professionals in the hospital take care of them. It was an amazing feeling to be able to do that type of work.
Yeah, I mean, talk about coming up clutch. And is there any one particular story in terms of your time, those 11 years as an emergency personnel, really rescuing people and like you said, salvaging lives? Is there one story that comes to mind that kind of would give our listeners like a picture of that rush, that adrenaline, and really just being able to make such a huge impact?
You know what? It's one of the first things that have ever happened in my career. It was literally within a few months of me actually starting that type of work. There was a major accident on the 60 freeway in Chino.
Yep.
And we had heard a couple of ambulances get called to it. And next thing you know, they were calling multiple ambulances, fire department, and they were calling an airship for a huge car accident. And we get down there, and a car had literally, the top of the car had almost gotten shaved off and slammed into the side embankment. And we pulled out, and there was already multiple ambulances, fire department. And the guy I was working with, the medic, said, we have an airship coming in because we have some pretty bad people in shape. And we went into the car, and there was 2 decapitations in the front seat.
Oh, my goodness.
The driver was decapitated.
Oh.
The front passenger had a piece of the car right down the middle of her face. And they had 3 individuals in the back seat, including a 11 or 12-year-old boy. And we were actually responsible for that individual. And nothing had happened to that individual, but I remember the medic at the time saying, he needs to get on the airship because he's in bad shape. And I was brand new at this, so I'm like, what the heck is he talking about?
Emotionally.
Later to find out that, he had a major head injury.
Oh.
And if that medic hadn't made that choice to get him on the air ambulance over to Loma Linda University, more than likely he would not have survived. So there was no outward kind of injuries, but the impact of that accident had caused some major injuries. And that dramatically affected me for the rest of my career. I couldn't drive for months after that. It's just, I was completely affected by that accident. But yeah, that was like one of my first ones ever. And it was, it made a big impact on me.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, I guess dealing with huge tax problems at that point looks kind of pale by comparison in a way, but it's ironic that you mentioned the 60 freeway because I actually personally almost died on the 60 freeway. That's probably the closest that I came to actually losing my life is a lady completely rear-ended me and luckily hit at the right angle where it wasn't like a full-on, hit, but she was going about 50 and knocked off the back of my car, started a big fire and very early in the morning when I was driving. So I just think that especially with this whole, the COVID-19 situation and, between your military background and the medical personnel that we just have so much gratitude for right now is like just people that are actually putting themselves out there, like you did for 11 years. And so I guess just, and I know with Jeff's dad being a Marine fighter pilot as well, I mean, just kind of that gratitude from all of us for you guys that are there when we most need you. I mean, just thank you, man. It really is huge.
Oh, thank you.
So Carlos, you were in this exciting job. What was kind of the catalyst that told you to move into taxes?
It wasn't by choice, believe it or not. The funniest thing about this, and I got to write another book about this whole thing. It was my 11th year, and one thing a lot of people don't realize is that, to drive those ambulances, just to be in the vehicle, you have to be licensed to be in those vehicles. There's a specific ambulance driver's license. And they're very strict in regards to your driving records and things like that. So, because there's a separate insurance policy they all have to have that's paid by the company. And my thing was, back then we worked 24-hour shifts. Sometimes we would work 72-hour shifts. And one day I had actually, after I believe it was like a 48-hour shift, I went to like a drive-through coffee shop, locally here. And I had felt, the ambulance is like really tall, right? And I slightly scraped the top of this like overhang.
Oh no.
And it was a spanking on the hand, it's just like, hey Carlos, you did this, hey, don't do it again. No big deal. That insurance license, you can only have 2 incidences in 1 year and then they got to pull your license, right? Well, literally 360 days later, I had actually got off another long shift. I parked my ambulance the way we all do when we get off the shift. And I forgot to put an emergency brake because it was on an incline and it crashed into a couple of other ambulances.
No.
And I literally got, a supervisor came to me, a few weeks later and said, Carlos, we got a problem. I go, what's going on? They're like, you've had 2 incidences in a 1 year time frame. And I knew what that meant.
Yeah.
And I go, well, what are my options? He's all, well, you can't be on an ambulance going on calls. We're going to have to put you at a desk job. And at that point in my life, I was working these great, I call it the firefighter shifts, 10 days a month, 24-hour shift. And I'm like, well, what's my other option? He's like, we're going to have to let you go.
Wow.
And by that time, I was already kind of doing the whole gig economy where, I had built a couple of small, entrepreneurial ventures. I was making some pretty good money back then while I was doing this. So I kind of sat back and just said, well, do I go to the desk job where I'm going to work 40 hours a week? Or do I just kind of pursue my entrepreneurial ventures? Because I did enjoy that. So I just told him, I said, I guess you're going to have to let me go. And that's what ended that career. But I ended up becoming a mortgage lender and real estate agent a couple of years after that. So I started kind of learning a little bit more about the whole financial industry. And I started doing taxes back then, and it was kind of like what most tax professionals get started. Just a little side gig. They kind of learn how to do taxes, and they're doing it for friends and family. And that literally led into the beginnings of my introduction to the whole tax world.
Now, you mentioned, and we were talking about, Carlos, when we were structuring this, this is kind of the story season of the podcast of, hearing people's stories. And one of the things that comes to mind for me about a story, right, is there's always a villain or there's an opposition. And so I hear you mention, being put into a desk job, needing to work like a normal person, right? 5 days a week, 40 hours. And I know for me, that was something that I was always interested in not doing. Would you say when you look at your career overall and what's brought you to here, like, what's the villain or the opposition that you kind of, if all these different careers and things that you've done that you've struggled against or wanted to, defeat?
When I started working in the whole EMS field, up until that point, you got to think this is now 14 years. I've never, up until that point, ever had like a 9-to-5 job.
Right.
So it was obviously Army, EMS stuff. And then when I was forced out of the EMS stuff, if you want to look at it that way, my entrepreneurial ventures, as we all know, it's not a typical 9-to-5 thing. In fact, I could tell people more. It's actually 7 to 11 o'clock at night. You actually work differently as an entrepreneur.
That's for sure.
So when I look back at it, it wasn't so much the opposition of 9-to-5. It was the opposition of somebody telling me what I had, when I could go somewhere, when you could take a vacation, when you have to show up, when you have to. I didn't like that, and it's kind of what is kind of making me really love what I currently do, is that I have the ability to kind of control, my work schedule, my time schedule. In fact, I probably work more than 9-to-5 sometimes, depending on the time of the year. So.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think that's something, Carlos, that's going to really resonate throughout these different stories that we hear from tax pros, is the ability to set your own schedule, decide when you want to work, how that plays in with your ability to be with your family. I know you also work with your wife as well as a business partner. So maybe you can also segue us into, as part of that conversation, you kind of exploring real estate. I believe you also did some marketing, but also I think it was kind of was it a W-9 claim or a W-4 claiming mistake? There was kind of like a little bit of a personal issue that brought you specifically into the tax problem resolution field. What happened there?
Oh, absolutely. As you mentioned here, I mentioned I had to work for 11 years doing the whole EMS thing. And I think one of the things that happened in my life that completely changed the direction of my life was a year or two into being working as that EMT. I was working overtime. All these guys are always working overtime during the holiday seasons. You want to make some extra money. And I remember the older guy, which I think he would have been 21 years old at that time. He's like, hey, you don't have to work that much overtime. Just claim, 10 exemptions on your paycheck and you're going to get a bigger paycheck. I'm like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. So I actually did that back then. When I did that, obviously, as many of your listeners are probably listening to, they have people that claim a lot of exemptions. You end up with a big tax bill at the end of the year.
Yep.
Well, that big tax bill, I ended up at the end of the year. I had obviously did my taxes, saw that tax bill, but I never filed the tax return.
Uh-oh.
And that led into the following year where by this time, what happens? You start getting that bigger paycheck. I remember buying a brand new Nissan hardbody truck because I had a bigger paycheck, got a bigger apartment, and foolishly, it just, I ended up preparing my taxes at that time. And again, I had a big tax bill. I'm like, I'm not going to file that tax return. And I did that for 8 years.
Oh, man.
Literally.
Oh, man.
Here I am. Now I've all of a sudden become a non-filer.
Oh.
And I didn't know that's what it was called back then, a non-filer. I just knew that I hadn't filed taxes. And it's one of the things that scared the living hell out of me all the time. I didn't want to answer the phone. I didn't check didn't want to open up my mail, that whole bit. I got those letters and they sent letters for years And eventually they stopped sending letters. Now, I don't think they stopped sending letters. It's back in my 20s. I tended to move a lot within the area. New apartment, new place, things like that. So that was going on in my life, as I'm going through this whole EMS thing. And then, obviously I talked about the accident. What happens? I'm no longer doing that. And, all of a sudden I'm self-employed.
Right.
And, how I kind of ended up in the real estate world, I had a good friend that worked at a mortgage bank, and he knew that I was kind of trying to do this whole entrepreneurial things. And he's like, hey, buddy, this was like back 2007, 6, maybe, right around there. And real estate is booming, kind of like it is now, right?
Right before the bottom fell out, right?
Oh, yeah. So he's like, hey, Chase Bank is looking for some people. And I remember going to Chase Bank locally here in Redlands. And I talked to the manager, and, he showed me the job description. They wanted a 4-year college degree, blah, 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 blah. And I had none of that.
Yeah.
But I went and sat down with them, and I must have made a hell of an impression, because he goes, you're hired.
Whoa.
Next thing you know, I'm in the mortgage business, doing amazingly well at the time. And I think one of the reasons I was doing amazingly well, I also knew the value of getting educated by taking classes all the time. And I spent a lot of time taking marketing classes. I became a big fan of Dan Kennedy, for those people that know that world, and joined a bunch of coaching groups. So I got so good at the marketing stuff, and I actually ended up creating a marketing company to help other real estate people market their business.
Oh, wow.
Back then, I literally had a coaching group teaching people how to blog. And this is back in 2007.
Nice. Early.
And to this day, I got a lot of those people that had joined my coaching program back then that are sending me referral business for my resolution stuff. We've stayed friends all these years.
That's great.
So that's how I ended up getting in that entire world. And it's also the time frame that I met while working at this Chase Bank. I met this client that wanted to buy a house, and that happened to be my spouse, soon to be spouse.
Oh, wow.
I met this lady. She came in. I was supposed to pre-qualify her for a mortgage. I ended up asking her out to lunch, and we ended up going to lunch.
You pre-qualified her on a different kind of interview.
Oh, yeah. And it was hilarious, because at that lunch, I knew I would marry her.
Nice.
At that lunch, that first meeting.
Love at first sight, huh?
First sight. I knew it. She didn't know it, but I knew it. And literally a couple of years later, we ended up getting married. I didn't get the mortgage at the time. I decided to refer her to a friend of mine, because I had bigger intentions.
Good move. Nice.
When I had met her, I was dealing with these tax problems. And by this time, the state had caught up with the IRS, was, sending letters, and I still didn't know what to do. And I met this girl, at this time we're dating, and this is all going on. And I became a scumbag. And here's why I say that. I married her and never told her I had this tax problem.
Uh-oh.
As many of your listeners will know, your tax problems become their tax problems.
That's right.
So I knew that I needed to resolve this like as fast as possible. And then that started my kind of pursuit of who can help me with my tax problems. And that's when I learned, only enrolled agents, CPAs, and attorneys can actually represent you in that world. And that's where I eventually ended up meeting my godfather, I call him now, Ernie. And I'll stop you in case you guys have any questions there.
I think one of the common themes among new entrepreneurs, I find this myself even, is the shiny object syndrome, where now that you're out of a secure, quote unquote, 9-to-5 or a secure salary job, you tend to try to look everywhere you can for income, and everybody that you see that's doing well, you want to emulate. So it's like, oh, real estate, oh, marketing, oh, right, taxes. And so their attention is split in so many different directions. And some people say that's great, that's fine, that's all part of the journey. And then other people say, well, to be really successful at something, you have to focus on it and really get better at that one thing to see the kind of returns that you're expecting from it. So which side of the fence do you land on that concept?
Okay, absolutely. And you're 100% on that. When you're trying to figure out how are you going to survive, you're right. Real estate, insurance, MLMs, taxes, and you're all over the place. In my case, during that situation, when I had met my wife, I was, like I said, I was still in the real estate industry. That industry obviously came crashing down in 2008. And I stuck it out for another year and a half, 2009, 2010, when they came to a realization that this is not going to work for me anymore. I'm not going to be able to make an income doing this. Luckily for us, we had built a nice little kind of marketing business that we were still able to kind of earn an income and survive. But we struggled. We struggled hard those years.
Yeah.
For me, it almost got to the point where during that time frame, I was jumping from thing to thing, trying to figure out how to make money. I think you're going to start seeing this over the next few years.
Yes.
People are just trying to figure out how they can make something.
100%.
Back then, I was going back and forth. In fact, I came to the point where I was terrified. The 2008, 2009 crash, it really bruised me. It bruised my ego. It bruised who I was as a man. If you want to look at being able to support, I almost became a minister.
Wow.
My minister was saying, "Hey, Carlos, you know what? I'm looking for a replacement here when I retire." And I was actually kind of starting that training process to do that because I was so afraid to go back into business again. It was scary. It's choking me up now just thinking about that time frame. I started kind of getting, doing my personal development, and I started to realize I need to get back. I need to get back into the world. I need to be able to kind of do more for my family. And luckily for me, had 100% support from my spouse in regards to this.
It's important.
It was the hardest times in our lives, but she was 100. She's like, whatever you want to do. And honestly, guys, I came so close to going back in the real estate industry. And this was almost 4 or 5 years ago, because I'm I knew real estate. I had done taxes before and I made, good money. I wasn't making a lot of money doing taxes, but I knew that industry. And literally, I remember sitting down with a good friend of mine, Oscar, who's a broker here. And I'm I'm thinking about, making this career change and moving forward. And he goes, Carlos, do the real estate. And I went back and sat down with my wife and I said, you know what? I don't want that stress anymore. That stress of, is a deal going to close? Is it not going to close? You spend your commission before you earn your commission, that whole bit. Yeah. And, but the one thing my wife told me when we sat down and had that conversation, because she knew I was an entrepreneurial type of guy. She goes, whatever you pick, just focus.
Yeah.
Focus on that one thing.
Yeah.
And I had hired Ernie to help me solve my tax problems. He had actually kind of initially put the bug in my ear. While he was helping me with my tax problems, my 8 years of unfiled returns, we had a conversation and he just told me, hey, Carlos, if you're ever looking for a career change, you'd be really good at this type of work. You're a really personable guy. I think you'd be really good at it. And it was just that small, 2-minute conversation that we had. And I had always thought about that in the back of my head. But I had always thought, how am I going to become a CPA? I have to go back to college, and I'm not meant to go back to college, that whole bit. And when I decided not to do the real estate, that I wanted to go stick with the taxes, initially it wasn't doing resolution, it was just doing taxes.
So, Carlos, at this point, you were doing taxes for other people kind of on the side?
Yeah.
While you had the IRS after you?
No.
Okay.
By this time, I had gotten that whole thing resolved.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
A couple of years into my marriage, we had finally came to a resolution and got it all taken care of.
Got it.
This is more like 5-6 years ago.
Gotcha.
While this was happening. So no, it wasn't during that time frame.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. Granted, it's kind of like the carpenter's house always needs a little bit of carpentry, so I don't think that would be totally unusual in our industry. I love the point that you make, and your wife's named Liz, correct, Carlos?
Liz, correct, yeah.
I mean, that support and that friendship, that love, that's something that we have seen, I know, with our family business, with my mom and my dad, but just people that we deal with in this industry that have that support and love from their spouse. Especially with a lot of tax pros being not necessarily in your role as a tax problem resolution specialist, Carlos, but especially with the seasonal aspect, right? It's, it can be feast or famine, right? And the financial part of it puts a lot of strain on marriages. And so I think for anybody that's listening to this, that, that appreciation for your spouse, and just that person that just rolled with you through all this, I think that's just really not to be underestimated. And you guys still work together to this day, I believe.
Absolutely. She's, I call her my operations maven. She just takes care of everything.
Nice.
She knows, I'm good at talking with clients. I'm good at my marketing. There's a lot of work that gets, as we all know, there's a lot of work that gets done in the background. And if it wasn't for her, there's no way in heck I can pull this off. And if it wasn't for her support, because, back then she could have easily have said, no, we're done with this entrepreneurial stuff. You need to go get yourself a job.
Right.
It could have easily came out of her mouth.
Every entrepreneur's fear to hear from a spouse.
Well, sometimes though you think it's good for you. You're like maybe this person could just put me out of my misery over here. I'm flopping around. Every idea that I'm trying isn't working, and also just going in a lot of different directions, right? Like I remember, when I was kind of doing some of the same adventures that you're talking about, right? Trying different things. I was involved with real estate as well for a while. It's like enough people say to you, "Hey, you're a jack of all trades, master of none," or these kind of little like hurtful comments that you get when you're trying to actually do an entrepreneurial venture. And sometimes you actually want to get out of it. You're like, you know what? I wish somebody would kind of put me out of my misery. And you look over at your spouse and be like, are you the one? But they know, right? I mean, like a good spouse and a good wife, they kind of know like what's going to actually make you happy. And they help you from going down those false paths, false security, right?
Oh, no, absolutely. And some people need to be told to go get a job because we all know not everybody's meant to be an entrepreneur. It's not an easy road. It's one of the hardest roads you can take.
There's a lot of self-awareness required, right?
Absolutely. And if you don't have that support structure there, it can get really tough real fast.
Yeah. And part of your support structure is the money, because that's the funny thing about being an entrepreneur is it's all numbers based. So it's like, can you support yourself? Can you support your family? And I think for a seasonal tax preparation with you, kind of moving more into resolution, it seemed like it changed the math of like really what you were able to do and what you were able to earn. So tell us about how you looked at, making the transition from being really a tax preparer to getting into helping people solve their problems.
As I had my tax prep business going, was doing great, but it's a lot of work. I mean, we all know that going through that whole tax season, it's a lot of work. And here's the thing, as good as I am doing it, I didn't like doing it personally. I don't like sitting at the computer. I don't like looking at the numbers and looking at this. I just didn't like it. And I needed to figure out, I like this industry because in a sense you are really helping people with their tax thing. And I think what finally kind of did it for me was no matter how good of a job you did sometimes, your client wasn't happy, whether the refund wasn't big enough or they owe on taxes, and they would just get pissed. All of a sudden, I had thought about Ernie. I said, how can I go into this whole tax resolution thing? And I started doing the research. Well, I knew becoming an attorney and a CPA were off of the table right there. So this enrolled agent, I'm like, okay, there's 3 exams I got to take, and I really got to learn this stuff. So I ended up doing a whole bunch of research and ended up picking one of your regular speakers, Tax Mama, Eva Rosenberg. And I was just dumbfounded how much I learned taking her program. And, not only did I learn, how to pass these tests, but I learned the business. And it wasn't an easy route. I ended up taking my first test. I passed it. I took my second test. I failed it. Was bummed. I failed it by like 3 points. And then I took it again and I failed it again. But I wasn't giving up. The second time around, I didn't know none of the farm questions. And we all know, how do you tax a cow? And I'm like, what the heck?
Right. You should try to depreciate that livestock.
Those are becoming, you definitely know what I'm talking about there. And I'm just like, what the heck? And I failed the second time around, I failed it by a couple more points and I wasn't giving up. And then I finally, when I passed that second one, I knew that, okay, this is golden because that third one, I was ready for that third one. And I ended up passing my third one. I became an enrolled agent.
Nice.
Now here I am. I'm a licensed enrolled agent after completing those 3 exams. But one of the things that I came to realize becoming an enrolled agent, it really scared me. The reason it scared me because it really kind of showed me how much I didn't know.
Yes.
You don't know what you don't know. So I became a literal CE monster. Every year I take at least 200 to 300 CEs a year. I sign up for everything. It's kind of how I got introduced to Pronto Tax.
That's why we love you so much, among other reasons. And I think that's what we see, right, is people that invest in their own training, they have not that much trouble having clients invest in them as well, because it's kind of like you sell how you buy, right? So if you are a buyer and you believe in investing in yourself, other people want to invest in you. And so that's why for us marketing you and your story through this contest, for example, I mean, we spend money, we spend resources to do all that, but we feel confident to do that with somebody that you're so active about investing in yourself and kind of making sure that your clients really get the benefit of those investments.
And I think this is a perfect year to kind of show why you need to invest in yourself, because things are changing so fast, so quick. All your enrolled agent license does, and I think it just shows you how much you really need to invest in yourself. And between Pronto Tax and all the other programs out there, I always hear people like, well, whose program do you like? I would go, I like them all.
Yep.
I take them all. As you learn something different from every one of them, you learn a unique angle. I had somebody recently say, but that program, I wanted to join that, but it's $400. I'm like, so that $400, you're going to make that tenfold, or you're going to save yourself from making a huge mistake doing something. That's the last thing you need to be thinking about.
So Carlos, can you speak to that a little bit? Because that person that is struggling, they might have that shiny object syndrome. They might be jumping. Taxes might be just one small sliver. And so for them to look at, I could focus on it. I could go deeper. I could invest in myself, but it's too expensive. It's too much work. Like, what made you go from just preparing taxes to like wanting to focus on just taxes? Like, what was it about the business or what you were trying to do that allowed you to lock into that and go deeper and kind of not do a lot of the other things? Because I think that person that you just mentioned, that's like, it's $400, it's too expensive. They're still on the fence chasing a bunch of different things, and they don't want to go too deep or too expensive into one of them to really get the returns that they're looking for.
Right. Like with me, when I became an enrolled agent, I had realized at that point in time that I wanted to help people with tax problems. I wanted to help people that were me, in essence. Somebody that, just made a mistake, something happened in their life, now they're in trouble with the IRS. So I had to figure out, okay, if I'm going to be the best at what I want to do, I need to start investing money on becoming a great tax resolution person. Did it cost a lot of money? Absolutely. But I'll tell you this. One client in the resolution world could pay for an entire year's of expenses of all these programs. When you focus, that's when everything kind of changes in your life. So whether I even decided, okay, it's time for me to slow back doing actual taxes, which people are cracking up. A lot of my my friends, colleagues in this world, because now I'm referring them business. Hey, I got somebody that's got a couple of corporations. Can you take care of it? And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, because now I am completely focused on the resolution side of it. And I'm noticing my income is expanding exponentially the minute I started doing that.
Wow.
Yeah. And it kind of was a winding road to get to that point.
It is.
The people that you mentioned in the industry, that it's Eva Rosenberg, all the stuff you've done with us, Jason Bowman. I mean, the role of the mentorship and learning from other people, as well as you being somebody that gives back a lot to our community, and you have helped other people. And between Ernie, your tax res guy that helped you out, it's kind of like those relationships have just made such a huge difference for you and made you into, realizing the value of relationships when you work with clients.
Oh, absolutely. Relationships are everything in this industry. I can pick up the phone. I've got 3 or 4 people that I call on a regular basis. One of the biggest bummers for me this year, obviously because of the COVID-19, is that I've had like 8 or 9 events I've had to cancel.
Yeah.
So, and it's just it's a bummer, but for your listeners, spend the money. If you're going to go in the tax resolution world, go that route. If you're going to go doing corporate returns, concentrate on that. But if these individuals just focus on their particular niche that they want to go into, oh man.
Well, it's interesting though, Carlos, because I think the thing that I see among people when they really are aggressively growing their business in our industry, in the tax industry specifically, is that you have to have that mastery of the technical skill mixed with kind of really like a good degree of courage, right? Because if you earlier in your career, right, you're seeing people decapitated, you're taking people in the worst imaginable, you're salvaging their lives, like you said. It's kind of a little bit of the calm that you have to have in dealing with these really messy situations where people are stressed out. But then on the other side of that also is an underestimated point of view of you can be as good as you want technically and not be enjoying the financial success that you want because of a lack of focus on marketing and sales.
Oh, yeah.
Marketing specifically it kind of is nebulous to a lot of tax professionals, right? You already had a background in it in terms of like, helping other people with their marketing, as well as all your entrepreneurial ventures, obviously all entailed marketing. Can you tell us a little bit more about like, what does marketing mean for you? And how do you think we in the tax industry can get better at marketing and embrace it more?
Marketing's everything. You can be EA, NTPI, attorney, this and that. And I know a lot of those individuals, a lot of friends in this business that have every technical aspect in the world, but they have no clients coming in. We are truly in the business of marketing. We happen to do the taxes or tax resolution as our business, but you have to become really good at marketing.
So what does marketing mean to me though? Like if I say I don't have the background in marketing, is I'm told marketing's everything for me, but like for me as a tax pro, like what does that mean? Like what do I need to do?
People need to know what you do. In terms of, nobody knew what I did. I kind of did a little bit of taxes on the side here and there, but I was completely unknown. And I've gotten to the point where when people talk, they know Carlos, and this goes back almost to the focus question. When you're talking about Carlos, he's the guy that deals with taxes. One of my marketing things, and this is something Jason got on us, you got to put out a book. It sounds like a long process, but it's really not. I just told my story in my book. Last year, I was invited to speak at 2 different real estate events. It was like the beginning of the year, launch of the year for real estate people. Those 2 events kept me busy all year long. So I tell people, you don't have to do a ton of it, but get out there. People locally should know what you do, whether it's social media. I talk about marketing. I do videos. I got one specific video I did on YouTube. I did it literally in the living room of my house in front of my library, not my living room, my library. I get calls once or twice a week from this one video I did, I think 2 years ago.
Wow.
People need to know what you do. And most people, they're good at their craft, just nobody knows what they really do. And that's a problem.
Yeah, which makes it tough to get clients.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good point in marketing, because if you think about somebody that's a jack of all trades, the funny term I've heard is like a shadow preparer. Like you go to their Facebook profile and you can't tell that they prepare taxes. Like they have a nice picture of their kids. They don't have any information about what they do. They don't have a website. Like you just kind of have to know through the ether that like they do taxes somehow and it's all referral based, but they don't really come out publicly and say it because maybe they also have a job, maybe do real estate, they do other stuff, right? So so they don't really want to tell everybody what they're doing, but that is such a crucial point of marketing.
You see that all the time. I know some people in this business, I know they would be so good at what they do, but the problem is they do taxes, real estate, insurance, and a few different MLMs, and if you were to say, hey, what does Mary do? I don't know. And you know what? And I'm guilty. I'm guilty of that. I remember growing up, and my son, who's an officer now in the Navy, but, we'd go to Boy Scout meetings and, I'd meet dads, he's a software engineer or he's a fire captain. People would ask, what's your dad do? He didn't know, because I did so many different things.
Yeah. I'll just say it's just none of your business.
Yeah.
What are you trying to judge me?
It's just like, if your kids don't even know what you do, how in the world is the world supposed to know what you do?
Ooh, quotable.
Oh, that hits hard, Carlos. I'm right here, man. I'm right here.
That really hurts, Carlos. Wow.
It hurts, but it feels good too, because I think there's something where, being a jack of all trades and having a lot of experience in different fields, it's interesting because it gives you a lot of ability to relate to other people. So once you do find your groove, you can relate to all different kinds of people, and just the different mistakes that you've made in your own business. It resonates because if you're dealing with a real estate agent, which is, one of the most common tax problem resolution clients you could possibly have, right? You know exactly what it's like to deal with the crash of 2008.
It's a great point.
Right? To deal with the fact that you just spent all your commissions already and you forgot to pay your taxes, right? I mean, so when you know how to relate to people, it's kind of like you're kind of happy you were a jack of all trades at one point because it makes focus better now. Oh, no, absolutely. And real estate people, when they come into my office, because that is a good portion of my clientele, people in the real estate industry, and they crack up when I tell them, so yeah, I know the money's already spent. What are you spending it on? They haven't even got a commission, right? So it's just like, yeah, it gives you a whole different perspective. So I think that's such a big part of us telling our story is to have some vulnerability, and especially as men, of saying that, hey, this was a really tough time for me, and this is how I kind of found my way out of it. I know people are going to respond to that part of it. We've obviously put a lot into this story contest and highlighting these, different kind of adventures that all these different tax pros have had. And we've had some really, really interesting stories that we're also going to be able to have in these other podcast episodes. So if I'm a tax pro and listen to this, Carlos, and, I'm looking you up and I'm saying, hey, this guy's got a book, he's active on social, he's active on YouTube with these videos. He's really telling his story as part of his marketing. How do you feel that the storytelling part of it, is that important for our business, for our type of marketing, and why?
It's the most important thing, because that's all I do is tell stories. Here's what happened to me. I went 8 years without filing my taxes. And I talk about it in my book. It's called The Law of Omerta, is that we don't talk about it. We just don't talk about tax problems. Who are you going to tell? Your family and friends, hey, I'm not filing my taxes?
Right. How was your weekend?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of shame in it. I've gone to the doctor thinking I had medical problems and later realizing there were stress problems primarily coming from not filing my taxes.
Right.
Because everybody wants that whole know, like, trust that we always talk about. And the only way you're going to be able to get that out is to share your story in a variety of different, whether it's on a blog or on a social media post or a YouTube page. You have to let them know there's a connection there. There's an instantaneous connection. Because here's the thing. My in-laws found out this story. My friends and family found out the story.
Right.
And I was afraid what they would think of me. So you have to be vulnerable. But if you're willing to be vulnerable to share your stories, it also will mean you can provide a huge difference in your family's lifestyle and security by showing a little bit of vulnerability there. So.
Yeah, and it's inspiring to the clients, because especially in tax problem resolution, is everybody's got a story of how they came to that. And a lot of times it involves, divorce, drug abuse, all different kinds of things that, people carry around and kind of don't know what to do with and struggle with. And so, when you can bond with people on that level of just keeping it real with them, we all go through things in life. Right. It's just the bottom line, and kind of our stories are the vehicle that helps us, form that bond with that person. And so, we're just so happy to have you as a guest on the show, Carlos. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Jeff, as well, for setting everything up.
I appreciate it, guys.
Great time talking with you, Carlos.
Appreciate you, brother. Thank you, Carlos.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
You too.